and this church leader walks up to me and offers to pray my gay away.
Wait, what? Like, how does that even make sense? Like, how are we in today's world?
There will always be, a lot of things regarding queer people.
You had a bunch of people try to hide your books, do different things inside bookstores.
Have been coming at me, and I'll just be like, well, this is what's happened to me, and people will be like, well, that person can get fucked.
That's a symptom of the industry not paying properly.
18-year-old me would have gone out guns blazing.
You might know today's guest is New Zealander of the Year, you might know him for his political activism, or you might know him from reading his book. In Shaneel's short career, he's already banned conversion therapy and he's helped change archaic laws on blood donations. In today's episode, we talk about a whole range of ways that brands and creators can participate in political activism or maybe not participate if they don't need to. It's a really interesting conversation where me, as a business owner, get some advice from a political activist on how I can show up to support marginalized communities.
All right. So, welcome to the podcast, Shaneel. Great to have you here. Why don't you quickly introduce everyone who you are and we'll get started.
Kia ora koutou, my name is Shaneel Lal. I'm really happy to be here. And I'm really excited to have a chat with you, Stanley.
Yeah. Cool. Well, hey, what I wanted to say is, like, the first time I had heard of you properly, it was the day that you won your New Zealander of the Year award. I was at the event, and I hadn't actually heard your story prior to that. Which once I heard it at the event, I mean, obviously they tell it in such an awesome way. I'm pretty sure I followed you on every single socials from that point onwards, and I was like, wow, I love this story. And I think I messaged you a couple of times on LinkedIn, or at least commented to you as well, because I really enjoyed hearing what you had been through and what you had achieved in the world that you had achieved. And I kind of want to give the audience a bit of a quick backstory about why do people know Shaneel? Like, what has been that journey that you've been on up until present day?
Hold up. There's a part where you cut out of the recording. I got a little bit confused whether you were playing something or whether you were handing it over to me.
Oh, no, sorry. Just asking you, what's a little bit about, why don't you bring us up to speed with your story of where you've been and where you're going?
Okay, perfect. No, not being there in person.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, look, I was born in Fiji in 2000, which was the year of Fiji's third coup. So I was about 4 months old when Fiji had its third coup, and then I was about 6 years old when Fiji had its fourth coup. So I grew up in a very tumultuous country there was a lot of infighting going on, but it also meant that the economy of the country was completely debilitated. So I grew up very poor. My dad never finished high school, and my mum never finished primary school, so we didn't really have a lot of money growing up. I mean, I normally tell people about the house that I grew up in. It was made of tin and wood, and it would leak every time it rained too heavily. So, and the roof would blow away every time we went into the cyclone season, so you had to tie it down with a rope when you knew the cyclones were coming. And my dad, growing up, was again really frustrated with life because of the poverty, and for him that kind of led to a lifetime of alcoholism and violence. So as far as I can remember, my dad wasn't very present growing up. But growing up in Fiji, other than that stuff, was actually quite fun. I grew up in 3 religions. I went to a Methodist Christian school. My mum's best friend, who also happened to be our babysitter, was Muslim, so we practiced her religion. And then my grandparents were Hindu, so we got the 3 big ones. But it also meant growing up in 3, rather strict religions meant that I didn't really have much room to kind of explore my queerness. I was in conversion therapy before I even knew the word gay, because I was a rather feminine boy. So for a lot of my childhood and teenage years, things were a bit bleak. But I've had a challenging, childhood, but I've never quite let that stop me from doing the things I want to do. I think the work that I get most associated with is perhaps the work to ban conversion therapy. It's something that I had been through, and it's something that I knew was damaging to people. And when I started the movement to ban conversion therapy, I didn't really think that we were going to get it done, but I was really committed to it. And Unfortunate of serious events happened, and we got the ban.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah. And so that sort of brings us, well, not quite today, but it brings us to where your brand sort of is now. In that, as you say, a lot of people do know you for the work that you did with banning,
Mm,
successfully banning conversion therapy,
mm.
which is an amazing achievement. And like you said, like how would one person think on their own? Well, when they first start off with that idea, like you said to yourself just then that you didn't think you'd ever get it done. What what was that like for people who I talked to a lot of people, just maybe not such grand ideas that you've had, but people who have like got a real cause that they believe in, that they're trying to fight for, but it seems hopeless. Like, what was that for you? Was it just like how did you persevere there and being so public about it too? Because it wasn't easy as you did it.
I remember when I was in about year 12, it was 2017, and I was volunteering at the Middlemore Hospital. And this story always cracks me up, in hindsight at least, is that I was volunteering at the reception. This church leader walks up to me and offers to pray my gay away. To which I think, good luck. But so I refused. And so he looked at me and he said, well, it's hot, but do you know it's hotter? Hell. Now, when I was a 17-year-old, you kind of think that the idea of hell is rather frightening. But at 25, you sit down and you think, well, if all the gays are going to hell, send me over, okay? Get me there as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Um, but in that moment, I'd realized that conversion therapy was legal in New Zealand, and not only was it legal, it was widespread, and people felt very comfortable offering it up. When you're giving it at a hospital reception, it really speaks to how common it was. So in that moment, at 17 years old, I said to myself, I can, I will, and I must, ban this practice. And the movement, of course, didn't start with me. There were people who were already agitating. There had been people who had been petitioning the government to get this law change. Um, Again, I said, a series of really fortunate events. In 2018, this thing called the Youth Parliament selections opened up. So I became a youth MP for the area that's now known as Panmure Otahuhu. I believe at the time it was known as Manukau East. And I was representing a Labour MP called Jenny Salesa in Parliament. So the 2019 event came around, and I wasn't quite sure if I was going to do this speech. So I get up and I say, well, Madam Speaker, when I woke up this morning, I didn't look in the mirror and say, oops, I'm gay, better fix that. And the house kind of erupted in laughter. And I knew that, okay, I've arrived. And that this course was, not only was this speech going to land really well, this course was going to be really well received. And it was. I think a vast majority of people in the country kind of heard about this issue and went, well, we cannot believe that this is happening in our backyard. So that presented as a challenge itself, because when people don't think that something's an issue, they don't really think it necessitates a solution. So it was a pro and a con, because it meant that we didn't really need to do much work convincing people that this needed to be banned. So people came on board rather quickly. Politicians a little bit slower. And well, I guess the churches still haven't come on board, but I'm not too concerned about what they have to say.
Yeah, that's I was the same. When I heard you win your award, it was I didn't even realize like it was I hadn't lived in New Zealand for a long time. So I moved away from New Zealand for like 12 years and I lived abroad in different places. And then you won your award, and I mean I had been back for a few years by that stage, but that was the first time I knew that that was even a thing that recent. Like I was like, wait, what? Like how does that even make sense? Like how are we in today's world where this he even had the opportunity to have this band. What
Mm.
a crazy situation we live in. And then what actually prompted me, and maybe you might have some ideas or thoughts, is like, well, what else must there be? Like if we've
Mm.
just put into this, like, and from your perspective, like, what are the other things that some of us are just ignorant to?
Well, look, there are lots of things, and there will always be, a lot of things regarding queer people, at least, in the foreseeable future. I think every marginalized group takes it, takes a turn, being villainized. Black people had their time, brown people had their time, women had their time, and I guess the gays had their time, and now it's the time for trans people to be the villains. The sad thing about this is that we see history repeat itself every single time, and we allow it to repeat itself. So conversion therapy was, a rather big thing for us to outlaw. The other thing that I worked on right after we banned conversion therapy was changing the blood donation policies, because we had in New Zealand blood donation policies for gay and bisexual men that were more archaic than what the United States of America had. Now, if you have policies that are more archaic than the USA, you've surely got things wrong. So, so very recently we have changed New Zealand's blood donation policy. So we no longer have a 3-month blanket ban on gay and bisexual men who engage in really sex, anal or oral, to a more individualized risk assessment test, which does not ask questions about one's sexuality. It asks questions about the sexual activity that is gender neutral. So that's a lot of people just thought, how could we have something so archaic on our books? But we do, and I guess that speaks to the fact that we cannot be complacent. We must proactively identify issues and solve them. You kind of can't just sit around and hope for progress to happen itself. It won't. um, you have to incrementally kind of chip away at things.
Yeah, interesting. No, great perspective. And I was going to then talk about, like, speaking of you as a writer
Mm.
and your book, and I wanted to move, like, kind of a big shift and change now, but I wanted to talk about the book, because I always found this really interesting about your book, is that it kind of had a bit of a Barbara Streisand effect with it, where um, you had a bunch of people try to hide your books and do different things inside bookstores. But then all that did is it caused a bunch of media about them trying to do that, which meant that everyone found out you had a book. The way I did it and the way that I got my hands on it was because I only knew about the situation because of them trying to hide it. Tell me about through that process and how it was, because you were very vocal about that at the time. I remember seeing you post about it.
Well,
You handled it really well.
I saw my campaign being written for me.
Yeah.
I'll be honest, if I would have sold fewer books had they not protested my books in the way that they did. I mean, had no one showed up to a bookstore and turned my books around, tried to hide it, tried to put notes in it, tried to tear it, tried to, the worst case was like someone tried to burn it. And, had they not been doing those things, a lot of people would not have gone out there to buy it just for the sake of kind of sticking a finger to them. And so, it was in the time I was fully aware how this was going to play out. I've seen them do this to other people, and I've seen, so really, if I had to play the role of a victim in that moment, you've just got to be a few steps ahead of these people, because my publishers and I were a little bit aware that this was going to happen. My publishers had published Jacinda Ardern's memoir, the first one, and the campaign called Turn Ardern had started. So they were essentially going around and turning Jacinda Ardern's book around. The publishers did a really smart thing where they published her face on both sides. So so they went out there, and these were mostly people who were against the vaccine mandates. They were turning her books around and kind of realizing, actually, she's on the back as well. And I don't remember. Oh, my campaign was called Conceal Shaneel, which I must give it to them. It's a very smart name. It's a very well put together campaign.
Yeah.
But yes, you're right. It had the effect of actually increasing my sales. I was able to stay on number one on a few different charts, and had they not done it, who knows how the sales would have played out.
Yeah. And what I really wanted to ask you about that process is, like, I felt you handled it perfectly. I was watching your post talking about everything that you did. And I kind of want to ask a little bit around, like, the mindset going into that, and how you managed to, maneuver that, because you really put the fuel on on it to make it turn into this thing. And you could see you doing it, and I loved it, every moment of you posting that. But like, is that like, what's the intention there when you're doing it? Is it you reacting to stuff, or is it like a premeditated thing going, okay, like I think this is going to happen. This is how I'm going to play it out. Like, what was the mindset when you're going through it?
Look, I think there was a part of me that knew that it was going to happen because we had
Yeah,
seen it happen with
yeah, just
other figures who had been published by the same author, sorry, the same publishers, and so we had an idea that it might happen. I could not stop them from doing what they were doing. To put simply, they were not going to be stopped, and bookstores were not going to, put their life aside and monitor specifically my book. So I could let them continue on with that and actually damage my books and affect my sales. Because they were physically hiding my books so people
mm,
could find them. And they were tearing it up so it was damaged book so people wouldn't buy it. So they were affecting my sales quite tangibly. Um, so I could, sit around and be the victim and cry about it, or I could really capitalize on the momentum. The first time I posted about it, people were furious, people were angry, and I knew that when people are angry, when people are upset, when people feel a bit hopeless, the best thing you can do is give them an action.
mm,
And I guess my call to action was get the book.
yeah,
And so, there's nothing I think worse than making people feel angry and upset and hopeless and then giving them absolutely no faith or anything to do or anything to believe in. So in that moment, I knew that people were feeling some type of way, and the natural feeling was that they wanted to support me because I was going through a difficult time. And I told them how they could support me. I think sometimes we just have to kind of hold people's hand through that.
yeah, yeah. No, I love it. I want to see it. It was such a great.
Oh, this is making me sound like some evil mastermind. Like, oh, the next question is, did you hide the books yourself?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Can I get the sneaker exclusive? No, I actually absolutely loved it watching it happen, and you could see like there was other people. I'd see your post, and then you could see if you did a little bit of research, you could see publicly that people were saying to do this thing that they were doing. So I just thought it was so brilliantly managed by you that like it was full Barbra Streisand effect. As soon as they tried to hide it, it made it bigger. It became on my radar, and actually when we were talking to the team about you jumping on the podcast, it was one of the main things that everyone brought up is like how good that moment was when you were on show. Because a lot of people in our team also were like rooting for you as that moment happened and we saw it. So I think it was brilliant. But it also speaks a lot to your ability to handle the negativity or the controversy in a quite a positive way for you and your brand. It's been something that you've been able to do time and time again. And I guess that like what my question is where does that come from? Like is that something that's evolved as your skin's gotten thicker as more and more shit's happened to you? Or is it something that like you deliberately think about and be like, okay, like how do I take this attention and turn it and make it positive for me?
I think a lot of it could have to do with the kind of family I grew up in. I grew up in a Fijian and Indian family, and to get a word in, you had to be quite consistent and quite persistent. So, on the question of whether I've grown a thick skin, I'm not sure. Maybe this is just how I grew up. Not really being offended or upset too easily. So a lot of the times when something really terrible happens to me or about me, I'm usually not the person who's upset. It's usually my friends and my online community that seems to be more upset. And I think because I'm rarely ever that upset, I'm able to manage the situation more carefully. Um, 18-year-old me would have gone out guns blazing and burnt a lot of bridges. I think if people must be some people around still from when I was a teenager that watched the way that I use social media, and it was absolutely heinous. People feared being tagged by me on any because I remember back when when we had the COVID-19 lockdowns and the North Shore parties were happening, and I was one of the key leads as to exposing who these people were. That the teenage years of me where I was like, okay, let's burn as many bridges as possible. But you know, you get slightly older and you realize that there are more strategic ways of doing things, and sometimes you just got to sit back and let situations play out, um, and then you make a statement about how you're feeling. I think people are really empathetic. Like, people don't like bullies. We have a country where people don't like bullies. And a lot of the times I've been in a situation where someone more powerful, more wealthy, kind of someone much older has kind of been coming at me, and I'll just be like, well, this is what's happened to me. And people will be like, well, that person can get fucked.
Mm.
And you don't really have to kind of tell people to say that, or ask people to say that. I think we just have a country of people who don't like bullies, but also like a lot of the online creators and influencers, if you want to call them, that are surrounded. Like, people don't usually follow you. Some people will follow you for the sake of, just keeping tabs on you, but most people follow you because they do genuinely care about you. And I found that with my followers, they're really genuinely good people, and they there because they committed to the courses that I'm committed to. They do want to do stuff. So I haven't, had great difficulty trying to get empathy from people.
No, no, it is really interesting. I find it really interesting because I talk to so many creators and influencers and whatever you want to call these people with brands, and there's very few of them that have the response you had or you have towards negativity and anything online in the way people say. And your articulation around bullies is a real interesting one because they wouldn't look at it that way, and they would get quite upset, take it quite personally. And the only time I ever see people who uh, are able to handle it quite well, they're typically a business owner. It's typically like a creative business owner. That's what I should say. Like someone, well, the people that I interview who have brands, they were a business first, an
Mm.
entrepreneur first, then became a creator or an influencer to promote their brand, as
Yep.
opposed to someone who was an influencer first and then has used that to build a career for themselves. Typically, on that side of the fence, they're quite uh, they're quite nervous when it comes to this sort of negativity, and they want to stay away from it. And then they like triple check everything they either post and put out, and make sure they're not going to hurt anyone's feelings and what people are going to think of them. Whereas like the people who are entrepreneurs first, they built a brand, they're kind of like a much different approach to it, which then puts in my head the two sort of categories I had for these people. You're like an enigma for both of them because you're not there really either of them really, and like um, you kind of sit somewhere in the middle. Whereas like my question then from all of that ramble I just had was, what do you consider yourself these days? Like, what is the label that you give you? Because like in terms of a profession is what I'm trying to move to here. What is that like? Because I know you just won some journalism awards and other things. Like, is that the way that you look at yourself? You tell me.
I think I think I measure my success on social media quite differently from a lot of other creators do. I knew very early on, what my purpose was going to be in social media, and that wasn't to make money primarily. It was to change things. Now, I could become a very palatable social media influencer, 100,000 followers. It would be an easier lifestyle, and I don't blame people who choose that lifestyle, because who doesn't like getting paid? I mean,
Yeah.
in this economy, the more money the better, right?
Yes.
But I knew that if I wanted that lifestyle where I could make a lot of money, or where I could just be just loved figure, then I couldn't really do the things I wanted to do. My line of work, which is, political activism, requires you to say and do things that sometimes upsets,
Mm.
the status quo. Um, and so I knew that if I was going to get into political activism, I wasn't going to be your big brand's first pick to send PR packages to or give brand deals to. So, I'd become very aware, and I had to double down on it. I knew that I couldn't kind of stay in the middle of the two. I couldn't half-ass my activism and half-ass the social media influencer paid work. So, fully committed to the social activism side of things. I wanted to get a law change. And so, if I really think about it, I could have used my social media to earn money, but I could also use my social media to change the law of the country. I mean, I was able to get in the criminal law space and change the law, and then I was able to change the blood donation policies. So in that sense, they those that's been kind of rewarding. So it's so you're right. It's difficult because I'm not really a business person who's kind of built an online persona, and I don't come from an influencer lifestyle background. I also never pursued social media with the intention of having lots of followers. I've been on social media since 2016 or maybe 2014, somewhere between that time, and it started off with posting random selfies, and as a social media was intended for, and then I started having opinions, and that's where everything just kind of went downhill. I just started posting, I would see an issue and I would post about it, and people would resonate with it, and it would just bring more followers. And, we were talking at the scale of 5,000 people. When my account blew up to more than 100,000, it's kind of one of those things you don't really, well, at least I don't really think about it or hope for it.
Yeah.
And then I got it, and then people were like, "Well, if you've got that many followers, you must fit into one of these categories of people." Um, I found that when I had not so many followers, people were more likely to kind of take me as a true activist, someone who was really committed to the cause. Ever since my platform's grown, I sometimes get called things like a part-time activist or just a social media activist, or someone who's just there for the attention and the clout. And it's like, well, the reason why I have this attention and clout, or really any kind of notoriety, is because people give it to me. I do not have it if people do not give it to me.
No, exactly. I was thinking about that too. Like, if you are not quite fitting in one of these boxes that people say, and you're more of a political advocate, how do you, like, currently, like, how are you generating a career out of it? Like, where is your career to allow you to enable? Because activism's not
It doesn't
cheap.
pay anything.
It's not paying a lot. So where do you, is it just book sales? Like, what else do you do? Is it journalism? Is it, what else do you
Yeah. Well, I went to law school, so I have a Bachelor of Laws. I'm currently at law school again, writing my Master of Laws in international law space, and I finished in July. And who knows, maybe I might go back to law school again. I do
do?
work, I do a bit of political research, so it's kind of what my day job is, and what pays my bills. But it's also a job that kind of keeps me. You learn a lot. You learn a lot when you do political research, when you support politicians. That's really cool. So, capacity then becomes a really big issue. I think for people who do social media as a job, influencing as a job, this is what they do. This is what their time is spent. But I'm currently clocking an 80-hour week between work and studies. You do a 40-hour week at your day job, and then you do 40 hours on a full-time master's, and then you post on social media when you get time. So I certainly haven't been keeping up with social media in the same way that I would have if I was just at university and not working. But equally, I've kind of thought to myself, I do not fear the risk of becoming irrelevant. If I at some point get relegated to irrelevant, it's probably because I no longer have something of value to contribute. Right now, I am confident in my ability to contribute in a manner that keeps my platform there. Um, and I think I just have to lean into that and trust that. Like, for example, my master's is on the issue of international law, indigenous rights, and queer rights. And I'm going to spend the next 4 months kind of working on that really hard. And at the end of 4 months, I will have something that I can bring to my audience. And it would be another big thing, like getting conversion therapy banned, turning the blood donation policies. So, yeah, I think getting older has slightly slightly made me feel less less pressure to constantly post to feed the algorithm. That's not really good advice for people who want to grow their platform. But for me, someone who's gotten to a stage where I've established who I am, I've proved that I can do things, and So it doesn't growth isn't my primary focus. My focus is, again, creating change, social change, and social media is one vehicle for it, but it's not the primary or the only one for me. So
Yeah.
it really depends on how, things play out in the next few months for me.
Yeah. No, I think it's a very mature response in that, if you don't, as a political activist, if you don't have value to add, then the platform's not necessarily relevant for you at the time because actually you're not here to be famous. You're here to make change, and as long as you can make change, that's all you need it for. And you're confident in the fact that the next change you want to make, your voice will be relevant again. I think that's a really mature thing. And I think like for a lot of people listening, even if they're creators, that's great advice. If you're not adding value to the world in some form or another, and look, granted, some lifestyle influencers probably add a different type of value to the value you offer the world. But still, what we're saying here is that like post with purpose, like have purpose behind what it is that you're doing. And if you're not doing something with purpose, then it's okay to be somewhat irrelevant for that season.
Yeah, I mean, we live in a country with it's not a massive country, but we still have, a few million people around, and sometimes I have to think to myself, well, I don't need to do everything. I also don't need to have an opinion on everything. I'm also not, the best person to have an opinion on everything or to do something. And it's fine for someone else to have that opportunity and to have that growth on this, whatever it's social media or whatever their journey is. So, and I've become a bit more comfortable with the idea that I'm not really in a competition with anyone. Everyone's doing their own thing, and if you're doing something that is specific to you, that is unique to you, then you don't really need to fear. And I think if I was, doing a bit more of the commercial influencing, lifestyle influencing, there would be more pressure because there you are competing with a group of people that don't really have much. There's not much range, for like a better term. But I mean, it's also an industry that I kind of at one point thought would collapse. And I don't know if this is what's actually going to happen. This is how I felt: is when the Auckland floods happened, there were still people trying to promote like appliances, and I
Yeah.
thought to myself, does anyone really give a fuck, like, about your hair straightener when the house is, like, underwater or, uh, so it's that's why I thought, what is a sustainable future for this industry where, you can't actually go out there and promote your hair straightener when there's a cyclone or when there's a flood? And, with climate change, we're gonna get many more of these instances, with what I believe the rise of far right extremism. We're gonna get more, incidents where people will not want to engage, in someone selling an item to them on social media. So I did at one point feel a little bit concerned for it, and I think that may have contributed to me kind of slowly walking away.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that the industry is the guys who are succeeding, the brands that are succeeding with brand partnerships and brand sponsorships are understanding that selling on social media at all times, all the time, is just not working. One, like there's a flood or not a flood. It's
Yeah.
just we don't want to just see our favorite influencers constantly just showing us product.
Yeah.
And you even look at like there's a bit of like backlash with people even like The Rock, who's like got obviously hundreds of millions of followers, but just constantly sells to you on his platform now. There's a bunch of pushback on his followers who are like, mate, like stop selling us your next movie or your next thing, just like we want to follow you as The Rock and all we're getting is ads from you. So I think you're right. I think there's like this shift toward how do we integrate stuff a lot better? How do we show some real things? And you can look at it rises of like creators in the tech world like MKBHD, who he's got 16 million subscribers or something on YouTube, and he is quite adamant that like nothing here I do is an ad. This is me like really testing things to show you what's valid, and you can
Mm.
make a great choice of it. So I think you're right. I think that is, and like watching people run branded campaigns during a time of crisis is actually ridiculous. And I think the problem I think there, especially in New Zealand, that's a symptom of the industry not paying properly. That these people have got to take any check they can, and you got these young creators who are getting paid literally hardly any money because the industry isn't really controlled right in New Zealand
Yeah,
specifically, and they're
yeah.
just trying to make a living, and then they get
No,
back.
no, I completely get it,
Yeah,
That's why I'm not actively having a go at influencers
yeah,
promoting things, At the end of the day, people need to pay their bills, and this is what's paying their bills.
yeah,
They need to do it. Some of those influencers are parents, and the whole thing is being a parent and an influencer. They don't have day jobs, and if suddenly they couldn't be influencers, their kids wouldn't have, resources. So it's really complex. It's really complex, and it doesn't quite help that we don't live in a world that is free from crisis or.
yeah, exactly. Which actually leads me on nicely to like my sort of last conversation I wanted to have with you around the where does business um, fit into political activism? Like, where does it fit in?
There are, I think, some businesses and brands who've actually been able to do really good work. So, oh God, I'm a little bit hesitant to mention any brand
It's
entirely.
okay. Don't have to mention anyone by name, but like
Entirely because
specifically.
I would think they're good, and then someone listening would be, actually, hold up, I know this bad thing that this company or this business has done. How dare you promote them? Um, so I know, like, for example, there were brands, for example, who sold beauty products and then donated all their money or half of their proceeds to a group like Make It 16, who is at the time, at the Supreme Court trying to get a declaration of inconsistency saying that, you should lower the age of voting. So there's been work like that where brands actually get behind a cause, give money where it's needed. Um, so that's really good. Like, for example, Woolworth has for many years done collected donations during Pride Month for Rainbow Youth. And so they don't really gain anything from it. So at the checkout, they'll say, "Do you want to round up your payment to the nearest dollar?" And then that money then gets donated to Rainbow Youth. So there are examples of brands who actually do really good work where they don't just make money off the rainbow, they then put that money back behind the rainbow, I guess. And then there are some really awful brands who will just slap a rainbow on their logo on the 1st of February and take it down the moment 1st of March hits. Particularly clothing brands, they love to do this, and there's really no other sign of support. So I guess it's a matter of where the money is going.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting, right? So it's like rather than, do you think from a business perspective, rather than just showing support from a branding, here we've got the rainbow, it's actually just following the paper trail. Like, what are you actually doing to support the people who are on the ground trying to
Mm,
fight for the cause and being able to prove that? Is that kind of what you're saying to brands who might be listening?
mm. Yeah, look, I think, a year or two ago, we had this really, public debate around whether, these were all telecommunication companies, all the big ones, the big three, came out and said, we don't actually want anti-trans customers. If we're going to be pro-trans people, and if that upsets you and you want to leave us, it's your choice, but we're not going to kind of bend over for anti-trans rhetoric for your money. And when all the telecommunications company band together like that, it leaves people with no choice. So I think it's also about solidarity between companies. You can't have one company, for example, if one of the telecommunication companies were like, that's fine, like all the anti-trans people can come to us. The other two or three or four, whatever they're saying, it no longer matters because now you've got someone to entertain these people. But the fact that all big ones came together and said, you know what, we don't need you, and then suddenly there was no room for that rhetoric to go anywhere. Um, so solidarity amongst brands is a good one. And I'll go back to the first one is that if you're making money off the community, try to give back to it. And I'm not saying give away all your profits because obviously you've got to keep some of it.
Yeah,
But otherwise, just don't pretend like I don't pretend to be supportive. One of the big things, about influencing industry that I find rather frustrating is that you'd have some influencers of really large platforms who'll say, "Oh, I am trying to do social good with my platform," and then they'll turn around and work with companies who are complicit in, funding the creation of war weapons. It's that's a bit like, okay, sure, you work with that company because you need to pay your bills, but you can't, have it both ways. You can't work with a company that is unethical and doing really significant harm, and then also claim to be doing social good. So I guess a bunch of things. I don't know if they make sense.
Well, I mean, it does. And I think, like, one of my questions as a business owner myself, like, that I find quite difficult in this space is um, when to put your voice behind something. Like, there's so many causes, like, coming from a somewhat of an ignorant place, like, there's so many causes to back, there's so many things to promote and help with. How should businesses Uh, should we be looking for things to do to support? Is it right that, like, we don't throw our voices behind when we're not really sure of how to do it? Like, how do you give advice to businesses like someone like myself who just doesn't know where to place his attention, like, his voice out there to support because he doesn't know enough or doesn't know? Am I just brandwashing stuff to make do it? Will I just look like I'm trying to
Yeah.
get business from
I think the first question is around capacity, right? So if you are, say, a small business owner or just have, if you're not turning over a lot of money, it will be a question of capacity. And you don't have to get behind every single course. Like I think a lot of companies have gotten behind like Toi to Tetriti. And, if you've done that, you don't have to go ahead and now get behind every other, social justice cause. Like it's a matter of capacity. You've done something and it's contributed something good. And if you don't have the capacity to contribute to other things, that's fine. At the end of the day, businesses weren't really created for the purposes of social change. Like there are other purposes for business, like ensuring that people are employed and they have good wages and that they can go and pay their bills and rent and stay alive. So there are, the primary focus of businesses, I don't think is, creating social change, but
it?
rather ensuring that people are in well-paid, sustainable employment. Um, and that, I guess, you could argue is creating more change in its own way. So I guess capacity is a big one, but equally, if there's an issue that comes up that you're not sure with, I think a lot of, people that could be described as marginalized are always open to the idea of having conversations. Um, over the years, I've had many conversations with many people, and things come up that like, should we say something about this, or we want to say something about this particular issue, but we don't know what to say. And sometimes it's best not to say anything at all. Like sometimes some companies will say something and then won't have the courage to kind of double down, and so it actually looks quite bad if a company says something, gets bullied on the social medias, and then they take their statement back. Because now not only does it look like you don't support your initial statement, you've thrown the community that you were supporting under the bus. So yeah, capacity, have conversations we're not sure, and you don't always have to say something.
Yeah, no, I think that's great advice, and I think as, like, a business owner, I like that really resonates with me. I think in the other business owners that I talk to, there is a lot of social pressure to make a stance when things happen, but sometimes you don't have the capacity, you don't understand enough about it, there's not enough information going around, there's maybe too much information going around, you don't know how to take stock of it all. But, like, I really liked what you're saying there is just have a conversation with someone who might know the things that you need to know, or the people who are marginalized, or the people who may be affected, to then help make your decision. But also, maybe it's okay to just not say something.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be completely honest. I would much rather prefer if businesses had internal processes, hiring processes, for example, and HR processes that were free of bias, free of discrimination, and they had fair processes to hire people, and they employed people and paid them well and ensured that they were taken care of. I think really, if you could do that as a business, you're doing a good job, and I don't really know when we kind of got into this mindset that every bank must have a say on queer rights. I'd rather every bank, paid all their employees well and didn't charge people on a home mortgage and extortionate interest rate. You know what I mean? Like, there are different organizations have different purposes, and not every organization or every institution to exist has the purpose of creating, or doing activism.
Yeah, that's great advice. Actually, just on that then, on helping businesses understand like ways of recruiting, being like unbiased in the recruitment process. Like, is there any advice for business owners who are listening to this and how they potentially just like change a couple tweaks to their process? Because bias is one of those things like that sometimes you have it without even realizing.
I was rewatching this video that was made a few years ago in the United States of America, where they had created almost identical, CVs for white men and black men, and they'd sent it out to employers. And what they'd found was that white men who had a criminal or a felony conviction were more likely to be employed or get a callback than black men who had no criminal records but were equally qualified. So, the first step would be to accepting that bias does exist. And the second one would be to kind of not fall into this trap of wokeness. I think woke has been this word that has been kind of brought out and beaten up, but like a diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's not about favoring people. It's rather to remove biases that may already exist within the process. So it's not something that we should be scared of, because we don't actually want to hire people because of their identity. What we want is for people to have an equal go at opportunities, irrespective of their identity. Um, so, accept that these things just exist because of how our society has been structured for years, um, and then not being afraid of actually addressing them. Sometimes it doesn't actually hurt to bring in contractors who help you out. Like, I've got friends who do diversity, equity, and inclusion. I could hook you up. and just not getting trapped out in imported culture wars. Like, New Zealand's been importing a bunch of culture wars from the United States, and just doesn't help us. But I equally think people don't really have an appetite for that here.
Yeah, nah, absolutely. I something we try to do in our business, because I understand I have bias too, and there's certain names I'll see and I don't recognize them, and so that all of a sudden like gives that CV less of a weighting than a name I recognize or different stuff. Is that we have a process of our operations manager invites everyone to the interviews, to the group interviews. We have a different way for different types of roles because some roles favor, let's say, a lot louder individual, and others favor quite quiet individuals and whatnot. But it's just one way. We know it's not perfect, but it's one way of like, don't judge the CV necessarily. Like, let the person have a chance to prove themselves in a
Mm.
room, and then have both in a public room, but also in a one-on-one situation because people react. It's like, how do we give people the best opportunity to showcase their skills and abilities to us in the best way possible without, cutting them off before they even get a chance? And I've sort of suggested it to other businesses, and a lot of them find it quite a hard thing to do, like just to put that much effort into recruitment. But like, I think for anyone listening out there in businesses, like that's at least one thing we've done. It's been quite successful from our point of view. For me, the diversity and inclusion conversation isn't to tick a box. It's because we solve problems and create problems as a business for all types of people. And so I want all those types of people in our business to help us solve those problems because I want the voices from them. So the more different voices from different places I can get, the better and stronger the problem solving we're going to do is.
Yeah. I mean, you just have to rely on like actual facts, which there's studies that show that workplaces with equal gender diversity, they tend to be more successful. They tend to fall apart less frequently. So you know this could actually be an advantage for you.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, look, This has been great. We're kind of at the 50-minute mark roughly now. And so, first of all, I want to say thank you so much for taking this call with me, because I've been wanting to speak to you ever since I saw you accept the New Zealander of the Year award. But then I did a deep dive into your whole story, and I watched way too much of your content probably. So it's always been like, so I'm like, truly, thank you for coming on and having a chat to me. I really love your story and what you've done so up to date. And thank you for sharing some of the little tidbits with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I've had a really good time.
Yeah, cheers. All right. Take care. Thank you.